The morning sun beat down on the concrete walls of Fort Bradley Military Research Center. Dr. Myray Park pulled her car into the visitor parking lot, checking her watch. She was 20 minutes early for her first day at work. Perfect. Myray straightened her dark blue blazer and grabbed her briefcase. Inside were her new employee documents, security clearance papers, and the classified research files she had worked on for the past 5 years. At 32, she was one of the youngest leading scientists in military quantum computing. The security checkpoint ahead looked like any other. Gray walls, bulletproof glass, and 3 military police officers in crisp uniforms. Myray walked confidently toward them, her heels clicking against the pavement. She had done this hundreds of times at other facilities. ID and papers, the first officer, Wilson, said without looking up. His nameplate was slightly crooked on his uniform. Myray placed her military ID, security clearance card, and transfer papers on the counter. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Myray Park, the new head of quantum computing research. I'm starting today." Wilson picked up her ID, looked at it, then at her, then back at the ID. His eyebrows rose slightly. "This says you have level 4 clearance." "That's correct," Myray said, keeping her voice steady. The second officer, Thompson, moved closer. "That's pretty high clearance for a—" He paused, looking her up and down. "Civilian consultant." "I'm not a consultant," Myray corrected him politely. "I'm the new department head. My papers are all in order." The third officer, Rodriguez, snickered. "Department head of quantum computing." He emphasized the words like they were a joke. Myray felt her face grow warm, but she kept her expression neutral. She had faced this before. "Yes. If you check my transfer papers, you'll see they're signed by General Stevens himself." Wilson shuffled through her papers slowly, much slower than Myray had seen him process the white male scientist who entered just before her. "These could be fake. We get people trying to sneak in all the time." "You can call General Stevens's office to verify," Myray suggested. She pulled out her phone. "I have his direct number." "No phones allowed in the security area," Thompson snapped, despite the fact that the previous scientist had been allowed to keep his phone. "Put that away, or we'll have to confiscate it." Myray put her phone back in her purse, her hand trembling slightly with anger. She noticed other employees walking through the second checkpoint, while she was still stuck at the first. "Listen," Wilson said, leaning forward. "Why don't you tell us who really sent you? Save us all some time." "No one sent me," Myray replied firmly. "I earned this position through my work. I have a doctorate from MIT, 5 years of military research experience, and multiple patents for the technology this facility uses." Rodriguez laughed again. "MIT? Really?" Myray noticed a security camera above them. Good. She also saw other officers and employees starting to watch the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one stepped forward to help. "I'd like to speak to your supervising officer," Myray said calmly, though her heart was pounding. "Supervisor's not in yet," Wilson said, smirking. "We have to be extra careful with security these days. You understand?" Myray did understand. She understood exactly what was happening. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out another document. "This is my military spouse ID. My husband is also stationed at this base." Thompson glanced at it dismissively. "Oh, so that's how you got the clearance." Myray took a deep breath. She knew what they were thinking, that she was just someone's wife who got lucky. They couldn't be more wrong. But she had learned long ago that arguing would only make things worse. "Please process my clearance," she said firmly. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes." "These things take time," Wilson said, spreading her papers out unnecessarily. "Lots of verification needed. Could take hours." Behind them, a door opened. Myray heard footsteps approaching, but the officers were too busy examining her papers with exaggerated care to notice. She allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, timing was everything. May Ray watched as Officer Wilson continued to flip through her papers with unnecessary slowness. The clock on the wall showed 7:45 a.m. Her first meeting was at 8:00 a.m., and these officers knew exactly what they were doing. "You know," Thompson said, leaning against the counter, "my cousin took a computer class once. Maybe you two could talk about it." He exchanged smirks with Rodriguez. Mireille pulled out her tablet. "Would you like to see my published research papers? I have them right here." "No electronic devices," Wilson barked, more sharply this time. "I told you that already. One more violation, and we'll have to report you." Mireille put her tablet away, but not before starting its voice recording function. Her years in military research had taught her to always document everything. She noticed more people gathering in the lobby behind her, their morning routines disrupted by this unusual holdup at security. "Maybe we should call someone to verify these credentials," Rodriguez suggested, his tone making it clear he didn't believe they were real. "Could take a few hours to get the right person on the line." "That won't be necessary," Mireille said. She pulled out another document. "This is my direct appointment letter from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The project I'm working on is time-sensitive and classified at the highest levels." Wilson barely glanced at it. "Could be forged. We get all kinds trying to sneak in here. Had a cleaning lady last week who claimed she was some kind of engineer." He laughed, and his colleagues joined in. Mireille felt her professional calm starting to crack. She had faced discrimination before, but this was different. These men weren't just questioning her credentials. They were deliberately trying to humiliate her. "I understand you need to be thorough," she said, keeping her voice level. "But I've provided every required document, plus additional verification. My work here involves national security. Each minute you delay me affects critical military research." "Oh, now it's national security," Thompson said, rolling his eyes. "Heard that one before." Behind them, Colonel Hangilly had entered the lobby. He was walking quickly toward the security desk, his face showing growing concern as he recognized what was happening. But before he could reach them, another figure appeared in the doorway. Mireille saw Colonel Lee stop abruptly and snap to attention. The three officers, still focused on harassing her, didn't notice. "You know what?" Wilson said, gathering her papers into a messy pile. "I think we're going to need to run a full background check. Could take all day. Maybe you should come back tomorrow." He pushed her papers toward her. "Or next week." Rodriguez added, "Better yet, why don't you have your husband come down here? We can sort this out man to man." Mireille smiled slightly. "That's an excellent suggestion, Officer Rodriguez." She checked her watch again. "In fact, I believe my husband should be here any moment now." "Oh yeah?" Thompson laughed. "And who's your husband?" "The base commander." "Not exactly," Mireille replied calmly. She could see Colonel Lee trying to get the officers' attention, making small gestures behind them. But they were too caught up in their power play to notice. The footsteps behind them grew closer. Mireille maintained eye contact with Wilson as a shadow fell across the security desk. She saw the moment realization began to dawn on his face as he noticed Colonel Lee's rigid posture and salute. The voice that spoke was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Officer Wilson," the voice said, "I believe you have my wife's security papers." The color drained from Wilson's face as he slowly turned around. All three officers' eyes widened as they saw the 4 stars on the newcomer's uniform. General Taiwan Kim stood perfectly still, his presence filling the security checkpoint area. The 4 stars on his uniform caught the morning light, gleaming against his immaculate dress blues. The lobby had fallen completely silent. Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez stood frozen, their faces showing the dawning horror of recognition. Colonel Lee remained at attention, his expression grave. "Sir," Wilson finally managed to say, snapping to attention so quickly he knocked several papers off the desk. "We were just processing my wife's security clearance." General Kim finished for him. His voice remained quiet, yet it carried across the now silent Lottie. "I've been watching for the past 10 minutes. Thompson and Rodriguez also snapped to attention, their faces pale. The security camera above them continued to record everything, its red light blinking steadily. "General, sir," Rodriguez attempted. "We were following standard security protocols." "Were you?" General Kim picked up Myray's scattered papers, straightening them with precise movements. "Standard protocol includes mocking a department head's credentials, making comments about her ethnicity, suggesting she forged documents signed by the Joint Chiefs." No one answered. Even the morning crowd of employees had stopped to watch, many recording the scene on their phones. "Myray," General Kim said, turning to his wife, "your research team is waiting. Colonel Lee will escort you to the quantum computing lab." He handed her the now perfectly organized papers. "I believe you have some groundbreaking work to continue." Myray took her papers, her head held high. "Thank you, sir." She turned to the 3 officers, who couldn't meet her eyes. "I look forward to seeing you at next week's security briefing. I'll be presenting the new quantum encryption protocols your team will be using." Colonel Lee stepped forward. "This way, Dr. Park. The team is eager to begin." As Myray walked away with Colonel Lee, she heard her husband's voice become even quieter, the kind of quiet that preceded a storm. "Now then," General Kim said, "Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez, in my office. Immediately." "Sir." "Yes, sir." They responded in unison, their voices shaking. General Kim turned to address the gathered crowd. "This facility handles the most advanced military research in the country. The people who work here come from every background, every ethnicity, every walk of life. They are all essential to our nation's security." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If anyone has a problem with that, they can submit their resignation to my office by the end of today." The crowd began to disperse quickly, many people whispering among themselves. The story would be all over the base by lunchtime. As Myray and Colonel Lee walked toward the research wing, she could hear the heavy silence behind them. Colonel Lee cleared his throat. "Dr. Park," he said, "I apologize for not intervening sooner. I should have." "It's fine, Colonel," Myray interrupted gently. "Sometimes these things need to happen in the open. Change doesn't come from hiding problems." They reached the quantum computing lab, where a team of scientists waited eagerly. Through the windows, Myray could see the most advanced quantum computer in the military, the machine she had helped design. "Ready to revolutionize military encryption, Dr. Park?" Colonel Lee asked, holding the door. Myray smiled, thinking of the 3 officers who had just learned a valuable lesson about judging people by their appearance. "More than ready, Colonel. We have work to do." General Kim's office reflected his personality, organized, precise, and commanding. The morning sun filtered through vertical blinds, casting straight lines across his polished desk. Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez stood at rigid attention before him, their faces fixed straight ahead. "Service numbers," General Kim said, opening a leather-bound notebook. His voice remained calm and professional, which made the situation even more terrifying for the 3 officers. They recited their numbers one by one, each voice slightly less steady than the last. General Kim wrote them down with careful precision, his pen making soft scratching sounds in the tense silence. "Now," he said, looking up, "explain to me why 3 military police officers decided to harass the head of our quantum computing division." Wilson spoke first, his voice strained. "Sir, we were following security protocols." "I have the security camera footage on my tablet," General Kim interrupted, his tone remaining measured. "Would you like to watch it together? We can start with the part where you suggested my wife's Joint Chief's authorization was forged." The 3 officers remained silent, sweat visible on their foreheads. "Sir," Thompson ventured, "we had no idea she was your wife." "That," General Kim said, standing slowly, "is exactly the problem, Officer Thompson." He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Dr. Park's treatment should not depend on who she is married to. Her credentials, experience, and authority should have been enough. He turned back to face them. Do you know what Dr. Park is working on in this facility? The officers shook their heads slightly. She's developing quantum encryption systems that will protect every classified communication in our military. Her work will save countless lives. He picked up a folder from his desk. This is her file. MIT doctorate at 25. 5 revolutionary patents, recruited by 3 private tech companies offering 7-figure salaries. He placed the folder down carefully. She chose to work for the military instead, to serve her country. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we didn't. No. General Kim finished. No, you didn't. You saw her face, made assumptions, and decided to abuse your authority. He sat back down, his movements deliberate. That stops today. He opened another folder. Officer Wilson, your commanding officer is Captain Hayes. Officer Thompson, you report to Major Chen. Officer Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. He looked at each man in turn. I'll be speaking with them shortly. The officers stood even straighter, if that was possible. Additionally, General Kim continued, you will all attend the security briefing next week. Dr. Park will present the quantum encryption protocols you'll be using. You will treat her with the respect her position demands. He paused. You will also write formal apologies, which I will review before they are delivered to Dr. Park. Yes, sir, they responded in unison. One more thing, General Kim added, his voice taking on an edge for the first time. Dr. Park insisted that you keep your positions. She believes this can be a learning opportunity. He stood again, leaning forward slightly. I suggest you don't waste that opportunity. The officers remained frozen at attention. Dismissed, General Kim said, returning to his seat. The 3 officers saluted and turned to leave, their movements stiff and mechanical. As they reached the door, General Kim spoke one last time. Remember, gentlemen, the next brilliant scientist you decide to harass might not be married to a general, but they deserve the same respect Dr. Park should have received today. The door closed behind them with a soft click. In the hallway, other officers and personnel quickly moved aside. Having heard about the morning's events, the 3 men walked in silence, knowing their careers had just changed forever, and grateful they still had careers at all. The investigation started the very next morning. Captain Hayes sat in the base's administrative office, reviewing the security camera footage for the 3rd time. On the screen, he watched his officer, Wilson, deliberately delaying Dr. Park's entry. The audio was clear, capturing every inappropriate comment and snicker. This is worse than I thought, Captain Hayes said to Major Chen, who sat beside him. They had both been called in to review their officers' conduct. Major Chen nodded, making notes in his folder. Thompson has been with us for 4 years. No previous incidents in his file, but that doesn't mean there weren't any. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez entered the room, carrying more files. I've been talking to other civilian employees, she said, sitting down heavily. Turns out this wasn't the first time. Just the first time they picked the wrong person to harass. On her desk, she spread out several complaint forms. Most had been filed by civilian scientists and contractors over the past year. Many of the complaints had been ignored or marked as low priority. Dr. Park's credentials are impressive, Captain Hayes said, opening her file. Published in top science journals, awarded the National Science Medal, created encryption systems used by NASA. He shook his head, and our officers treated her like an intruder. The phone on the desk rang. It was General Kim's office. Yes, sir, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez answered. We're reviewing everything now. She listened for a moment. Dr. Park is doing what? She put the phone on speaker. General Kim's voice filled the room. Dr. Park is requesting to lead the base's new cultural sensitivity training program, he said. She believes this incident can create positive change. She's already drafted a proposal. The three officers exchanged surprised looks. Instead of filing charges, General Kim continued, she wants to improve the system. She's offering to work with your officers directly. Captain Hayes leaned forward. Sir, that's very generous of her. But after what happened, I had the same reaction. General Kim interrupted. But Dr. Park insists this is better than punishment alone. She says change happens through education, not just discipline. The security footage continued playing silently on the screen. They could see Dr. Park standing tall despite the harassment, maintaining her professionalism. There's more, General Kim added. The Joint Chiefs just called. They've reviewed Dr. Park's quantum encryption breakthrough. They're fast-tracking the implementation across all military bases, which means our officers will be working under her authority even more directly. Major Chen finished, understanding the situation. Exactly, General Kim said. Dr. Park will be training security teams at every major military installation, starting with the officers who tried to deny her entry to her own lab. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez smiled slightly. Poetic justice, sir. Indeed, General Kim agreed. Dr. Park starts her new role next week. I suggest you prepare your officers. They're about to learn a lot about judgment, respect, and the danger of assumptions. After the call ended, the three commanding officers looked at each other. Well, Captain Hayes said, I think our officers are about to get the most important training of their careers. Major Chen nodded. From someone they tried to humiliate, no less. Sometimes, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez said, gathering the complaint files, the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes. Outside the office window, they could see Dr. Park walking toward the quantum computing lab, her head held high, ready to change not just military technology, but military culture itself. 1 week after the incident, the base's main conference room was filled to capacity. Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez sat in the front row, their uniforms perfectly pressed, their expressions serious. Behind them, dozens of military police and security personnel waited quietly. Dr. Myray Park stood at the podium, her presentation materials ready. The quantum encryption diagrams on the screen behind her showed complex patterns that would soon protect military communications worldwide. Good morning, she began, her voice clear and professional. Today we'll discuss 2 things: the new quantum security protocols and the updated security checkpoint procedures. General Kim sat at the back of the room, watching with quiet pride as his wife commanded the attention of every person present. First, Myray continued, let me show you what's at stake. She clicked to the next slide, showing a simulation of current military encryption being broken by quantum computers. Our enemies are developing technology that can break traditional security measures in minutes. The room was completely silent. Even Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez leaned forward, their earlier prejudices forgotten as they realized the importance of her work. The system we've developed here, Myray explained, pointing to a complex diagram, will protect our communications for decades to come. Every person in this room will be responsible for safeguarding this technology. She paused, looking directly at the 3 officers who had tried to bar her entry. Which brings us to our second topic, security procedures. Captain Hayes, sitting near his officers, nodded encouragingly. The 3 men had spent the past week writing apology letters, reviewing security protocols, and facing disciplinary action from their commanding officers. Last week's incident revealed flaws in our system, Myray said, her voice remaining professional. Not just in how we verify credentials, but in how we treat the people who come through our gates. She clicked to a new slide showing the updated security protocols. These changes will ensure thorough but respectful screening for everyone, regardless of their appearance, gender, or ethnicity. Colonel Lee, now appointed as head of base security, stood up. These protocols are being implemented at every military research facility nationwide, he announced. Dr. Park's experience has led to a complete overhaul of our approach to security. The 3 officers who had caused the incident sat straighter, the weight of their actions evident in their expressions. Their mistake had triggered changes throughout the entire military. Finally, Mary said, "I want to address the officers involved in last week's incident." She looked directly at Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez. "Your actions were wrong, but your willingness to learn from this mistake is commendable." The three men looked up, surprised by her words. "You'll be the first officers trained in the new protocols," she continued, "and then you'll help train others. Sometimes the best teachers are those who have learned the hardest lessons." General Kim smiled from his seat. This was exactly why he had married Myrae. Her ability to turn conflict into progress, to transform mistakes into opportunities for change. The rest of the presentation focused on technical details, but the message was clear. Fort Bradley was changing, and with it, the entire military's approach to diversity and security. What had started as an act of discrimination had become a catalyst for institutional reform. As the meeting ended, Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez approached Dr. Park. Their apology letters were in their hands, and their faces showed genuine remorse. They had learned that true authority came not from power over others, but from knowledge, competence, and character, qualities Dr. Park had demonstrated even in the face of their discrimination. 3 months after the incident, Fort Bradley had transformed. The security checkpoint where Dr. Park had faced discrimination now served as a model for military installations nationwide. New scanners verified credentials electronically, removing the potential for bias in document checks. Security cameras with audio recording ensured all interactions were monitored and reviewed. Myrae stood at this same checkpoint, watching Officer Wilson demonstrate the new procedures to visiting officials from other military bases. His presentation was professional and thorough. "Every person who enters this facility contributes to national security," Wilson explained to the visitors. "Our job is to ensure safety while treating everyone with respect." He gestured to the new electronic systems. These protocols were designed by Dr. Park's team to strengthen security and eliminate bias. The visiting officials took notes, impressed by the changes. One of them raised his hand. "We've heard about the incident that sparked these reforms. How did your team adjust to the new system?" Wilson paused, choosing his words carefully. "We learned the hard way that our prejudices made us worse at our jobs, not better. Dr. Park showed us that true security comes from treating everyone with dignity." Myrae smiled slightly, remembering how far these officers had come. Thompson and Rodriguez were now leading similar training sessions at other bases, sharing their experience as a cautionary tale that was changing military culture. In her office later that day, Myrae reviewed the latest implementation reports. The quantum encryption system was being installed at bases worldwide, and with it, the new security protocols she had designed. Her computer showed incoming messages from military facilities across the country, all reporting successful adoption of her reforms. Colonel Lee knocked on her door, carrying more reports. "Dr. Park, the numbers are impressive. Civilian complaint rates are down 90%. Security processing times are faster." And he smiled. "We're identifying actual security threats more effectively now that we're focusing on behavior instead of appearances." Myrae nodded, pleased but not surprised. When people feel respected, they cooperate better. When officers focus on real security indicators instead of prejudices, they do their jobs better. Her phone buzzed with a message from General Kim. The Joint Chiefs had approved nationwide implementation of her complete security reform package. Every military base would now follow what they were calling the Park Protocols. Officer Thompson appeared at her door next, preparing for his upcoming training session at Andrews Air Force Base. "Dr. Park, could you review my presentation? I want to make sure I'm explaining the technical aspects correctly." "Of course," Myrae said, noting how Thompson now treated her with genuine respect, not just because of her position or her husband's rank, but because he had learned to value expertise and character over preconceptions. As she reviewed his presentation, Myrae reflected on how a moment of discrimination had led to lasting change. The officers who had tried to humiliate her were now champions of reform, teaching others about the costs of prejudice and the benefits of respect. Her computer chimed with another message. The National Military Science Foundation wanted her to speak at their annual conference about combining technical innovation with cultural change. They believed her story and her reforms could help other institutions address similar challenges. Looking out her office window at the busy military base, Mireille saw Officer Rodriguez conducting a respectful but thorough security check of a young female scientist wearing a hijab. The scientist smiled as Rodriguez efficiently verified her credentials and welcomed her to the facility. Change was happening, one interaction at a time. 6 months after the incident, Fort Bradley hosted a ceremony in the main conference center. Military officials from across the country gathered to celebrate the successful implementation of the quantum encryption system and the Park protocols. Dr. Mireille Park stood at the podium, addressing the assembled crowd. 6 months ago, I stood at our security checkpoint, facing discrimination. She began, her voice steady and clear. Today, that same checkpoint serves as a model for military installations worldwide. This is not just my achievement. It belongs to everyone who embraced change. In the front row, Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez sat in their dress uniforms. Each wore a new badge indicating their status as certified trainers in the Park protocols. Their faces showed pride, not in authority over others, but in their role in positive change. General Kim watched from his seat as Mireille presented the latest statistics. Security clearance processing had become more efficient. Civilian satisfaction rates had reached record highs. Most importantly, actual security threats were being identified and stopped more effectively. The Park protocols have shown us something important, Mireille continued. When we remove bias from our security systems, we become better at protecting what matters. When we respect each person's dignity, we strengthen our entire organization. She gestured to the 3 officers in the front row. Officers Wilson, Thompson, and Rodriguez could have resisted change. Instead, they chose to learn and grow. They transformed their mistake into an opportunity to help others. The 3 men stood as Mireille called them forward. Each had written a section of the new training manual, drawing from their personal experience to teach others about overcoming prejudice. Today, Mireille announced, these officers will receive special commendations, not for perfect conduct, but for their commitment to change. They prove that it's never too late to learn and improve. Colonel Lee presented each officer with a commendation medal. The audience applauded, understanding that this ceremony celebrated not just technical advancement, but human growth. After the ceremony, Mireille walked through the security checkpoint where everything had started. Officer Wilson was on duty, efficiently processing a group of international scientists who had come to study the quantum encryption system. Welcome to Fort Bradley, he said to each scientist, checking credentials quickly but respectfully. Dr. Park will be leading your orientation today. Mireille smiled as she passed through the checkpoint. Good work, Officer Wilson. Thank you, Dr. Park, he replied, his tone carrying genuine respect. We're preparing for the next training session. 20 officers from overseas bases are arriving tomorrow. In her office later, Mireille reviewed the latest reports with General Kim. The quantum encryption system was revolutionizing military security, and the Park protocols were changing military culture. You've created quite a legacy, General Kim said proudly, both in technology and in human relations. Mireille looked out her window at the busy base. Officer Thompson was giving a tour to visiting officials, explaining how the new protocols had improved security and morale. Officer Rodriguez was mentoring a new group of security personnel, emphasizing the importance of respect and professionalism. The best changes, Mireille replied, come when we face our mistakes honestly and choose to grow from them. These officers showed us that. Now they're helping others learn the same lesson. As the sun set over Fort Bradley, Mireille knew that her experience had done more than just change one military base. It had started a transformation that would benefit generations of military personnel and civilian scientists to come. Sometimes, the strongest authority came not from rank or position, but from the courage to turn adversity into opportunity for positive change.